Yikes, yikes, yikes. A record-setting night for the Pacers in the worst way possible. The Pacers just gave up the most points they've ever given up in a single game in franchise history to the Hornets. Do I need to say more? Lots to talk about on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to cover today because the Pacers just had the worst defensive game they have ever had. And that is not an exaggeration. That is not just me watching a game and saying, oh, they played bad defense. They couldn't contain this guy. They did this or that. No, numerically, statistically, no matter how you slice it, that was the worst defensive game the Pacers have ever played. They gave up 158 points to the Charlotte Hornets. That is a franchise record. Points allowed by the Pacers. That is a franchise record. Points scored by the Hornets. That's not like overtime included or anything. That is the most raw points that the Hornets have scored in a single game and that the Pacers have given up in a single game. Oof. It was an ugly one for the Pacers. Going to talk about the history behind the 158, talk about the game in general, and then, as inspired by a thread from Mr. Pacers blog on Twitter, talk about missing Myles Turner and the consequence he's had here. And I don't want to just say this is because Myles is out. In fact, I don't want to do that at all. I just want to talk about this. A defensive-themed podcast is a good time to talk about the impact that Myles has, even though it is not necessarily the reason the Pacers sucked on defense today. In fact, far from it. But let's talk about the history first. Look, I always talk about the games. I always will. I usually lead with them, but when history is made, history takes precedence. 158 from the Charlotte Hornets in this game. Oh, my goodness. They hit 24 threes, which is unbelievable. By the way, let's just do some context here. The Pacers hit 13 more threes than the Pelicans on Monday, right? And they lost. The Hornets hit 14 more threes than the Pacers today and scored 158 points. How did the Pacers lose Monday's game? How did they just give up 158? This team is the most befuddling team ever. Anyway, the Hornets hit 24 threes. Kelly Oubre hit 10 of those. He had 39 points. He was ridiculous. He could not miss in this game. LaMelo Ball had a 29-point triple-double. They got 20 points from Terry Rozier, who hit 4 threes. They just could not miss from deep in this game. 53% from deep. They shot 58% overall. They were just ridiculous from everywhere on the floor. I mean, they only had James Bouknight shot 28, 4 for 14. Every other player that played shot 50% or better for Charlotte in this game. They made 26 free throws, 33 free throw attempts, 8 offensive rebounds, a low turnover game, 37 assists. I mean, that's going to happen when you make a lot of shots. Making 54 shots naturally leads to a lot of assists, but they were moving the ball well. The Pacers' defense was god-awful. God-awful. It was one of the worst defensive performances I've ever seen from any team, and the Pacers specifically in this one. And they were without a lot of their starters, sure, but that isn't, they've been without a lot of their starters for seasons and seasons and seasons. The time they gave up 155 prior to this game was 1982. We'll talk about some context on that momentarily, right? So they've had missing starters for 3 decades, 4 decades, 40 years have passed since that game, and they have not given up 155 points until the Hornets just hung 158 on them. It doesn't matter who was out. This was a terrible defensive performance. LeVert was terrible on everybody was terrible on defense. I don't need to call out specific names. Everybody was terrible on defense. The Pacers were only down by 1 at halftime as well. It was 70-71 at the break, right? They were in it. They played well enough to win. On offense, they scored 126. They played well enough to win there. It was the worst defensive game I have literally ever seen a team play. They could not keep a single Hornet in front of them. The Hornets' drive numbers have to be off the charts. They had 54 points in the paint, 30 fast break points, 69 bench points. You name the number, the Hornets had a bunch of it. Let's put some context on the last time the Pacers gave up 155 points in a game to talk about some history here. In 1982, I was negative 13 years old. Irrelevant to this discussion. But I was not alive, right? That's how long ago this was. 40 years is a very long time, right? Here is some stats from the last time the Pacers gave up 155 points in a game. The Nuggets, the team that scored 155 on the Pacers, took 1-3 in the whole game. 1 3-pointer. Basically every Hornet that played took a 3, except for Mason Plumlee. The whole Nuggets team took 1-3. The Nuggets in that game shot 59 free throws. The Pacers had 46 fouls in that game, right? Clark Kellogg fouled out, Butch Carter fouled out, Herb Williams fouled out. The Nuggets could just get to the free throw line whenever they wanted. They had 2 guys make more than 10 free throws on their team, in Dan Issel and Alex English in that game. They made 55 shots. They took 111. The NBA was a crazy, fast-paced mess in the 1980s, but 111 shots and 59 free throw attempts for the Nuggets in that game. They took 1-3, right? That is how crazy and different the NBA was the last time the Pacers gave up this many points. I've never seen a defensive performance this bad from the Pacers, especially. It was absolutely atrocious. Goga, after the game, poor Goga had to go on the stand, and he actually had an okay game. Next segment, when I talk about the actual game, Goga will get a small amount of praise. Very few players will get a small amount of praise. Goga said that the communication was terrible. You could hear a pin drop in the stadium last night. It was one of the quietest games it's been all season, crowd included. And they need to communicate better. They certainly do. The switches were bad. The keeping guys in front of them on the perimeter were bad. The Hornets could just whip it out for whatever wide open 3 they wanted at any time. It was putrid, and they always made them, including in the second half when they scored 80-something points in the second half. The rotations were bad under the basket. It was a layup line, obviously. When their worst quarter, the Hornets' worst scoring quarter, was 33. They got escalating points every quarter, 33, 38, 42, 45, an 87-point half. It's hard to make up numbers like this. It is absolutely ridiculous how well the Hornets played, how well they shot from everywhere on the floor with 106 true shot attempts. And their shot quality, according to PBP stats, which tracks your expected effective field goal percentage based on the location of your shots and the player shooting, was actually worse than the Pacers. And yet they absolutely lit them up. 30 for 48 on twos, 6 feet average shot distance from 2-point range is longer than the Pacers, but yet they shot 80% from 0 to 4 feet, 8 of 15 from 4 to 14 feet, 7 of 13 on above the break threes, 7 for 11 on corner threes. Insane game the Hornets played, making shots, obviously, but the Pacers gave them just wide open looks absolutely all night. They could not stay in front of anybody. They were not rotating well. They were not communicating. They were not aggressive early. And this is a problem that they all mentioned very often, is when other guys get hot and confident early, they're just always willing to take the shot when they get it later in the game. The 0.5-second rule is a lot easier to follow, where you pass, shoot, or dribble right away when you're confident and feeling it. And when they're not aggressive early and talking, it allows games like this to happen. And they were actually winning after the first quarter, but the Hornets still scored 33 and set the tone that they could have a game like this. It was the worst defensive performance I've ever seen from this Pacers team. And they obviously can play better than this on defense, but the big problem, beyond the fact that it happened, is that this team wants to be a team that prides themselves on defense. And they did not. They had no pride on defense in this game. They never picked it up. No one ever came in the game and supplied energy or a boost or was some motivator. It was just a rock-bottom defensive performance from the Pacers, and one that they would certainly like to forget. They all talked about how, this is an interesting thing from a perspective, right, of the basketball team. You have 2 options, and both have drawbacks and pros. You can either look at this game and say, we need to forget this as soon as possible so we can move on and continue our season and try to win games. But then you're forgetting about a game that you absolutely need to learn from and grow from. Whereas the other thing is you think about it and learn on it, but then you might sulk or have it pop up in your mind too much, and it causes you negative problems in the future. They have to do a good job of watching the film, seeing what they did bad, and forgetting about it, but still taking a lot of lessons from how terrible their defense was in this game. Every single guy that played in this game has to basically look internally and say, what did we do wrong? Only 4 blocks for the Pacers in this game. None of them from their starting 5. Only 9 steals. It was awful. It was so bad. They'll watch the film. They'll get better. Carlisle just had really no mincing of words, nothing really to say. Just, we sucked. We played awful. He didn't actually say we sucked, but that's the paraphrasing of what he said. So that's the gist of what happened in the game. And I'll talk about the whole game and then all the individual performances we saw. But if you need the 10-minute presentation of what you just saw, worst Pacers defensive game ever. Let's talk about the rest of the game, some individual performances. There were a few things Remember, they were only down 1 at halftime. There were a few actually okay positives in this game. One guy scoring his first ever NBA points. Let's talk about the game as a whole, as the Pacers are now done playing the Hornets for the season. But first, let's talk about the good folks over at BetOnline.ag who would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march through the football playoffs and beyond. And BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the sports wagering action for 2022 new year, and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. All you got to do is use our promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football to basketball to hockey to boxing to UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every single day, for your second listen to hear a team talk about a night where they set their most points ever scored. Go check out Locked On Hornets. Doug Branson, Walker Mel do a great job over there. Indy native Walker Mel as well. Okay, so it was 70-71 at halftime. The third quarter wasn't looking embarrassing for a few minutes, and then until it was. What did the Pacers do well? They scored 126. They had 7 players in double figures. It wasn't a totally awful offensive night. They had some two guys in particular that stood out as having decent performances to remember in this game. And first note I want to say from this game as the Pacers continue their push forward, 16 of their first quarter points were from sub-25-year-old players: Dwayne Washington, Chris Duarte, Goga Batadze, and Isaiah Jackson. Those guys continue to be at least somewhat impressive offensively and standing out in a way that is encouraging for the Pacers going forward. Obviously, the defense sucked in this game. There's no positives that you can go, yeah, we're psyched about this performance. But they did enough offensively to say, hey, there's a blueprint for something in the future, right? Isaiah splashed a 3. Isaiah took 6 free throws. Isaiah Jackson, a well-rounded offensive game in this one, on his way to 17 points, right? That is something interesting for the Pacers to try to look at and replicate how they can get it done in the future. Dwayne Washington at 4th, 2-pointers in this game. He's normally a 3-point specialist, right? Chris Duarte had 11. He was hot early, really struggled in the second half. And then Goga was the team's leading scorer, 17 points, 6 offensive rebounds for one Goga Batadze in this game, right? The young guys were at least somewhat promising on offense in a way, especially in the first half when the Pacers were in it and winning for much of the second half. If you look at the game chart, you would never know that this game ended up in a complete blowout because it doesn't look like the Hornets' lead gets huge until pretty late. But the Pacers were winning. Right before halftime, they were winning. I mean, they could have gone into the break with a lead. They were right there. So that is some positives. The young guys, especially in the first half, had some bright spots. And another player that deserves a ton of praise, Lance Stevenson. He was possibly the best Pacer in this game. Him or Goga were the two. Torrey Craig had a decent game as well. Lance deserves a ton of praise. Lance had 7 assists in the first quarter, not in the whole game. Lance had 7 assists in the first quarter. Lance finishes with 14, 6, and 10. Vintage, air quotes on that, because no such thing when you're a 10-year vet, but a vintage-ish Lance game, closer to that guy that was the triple-double machine in 2013-14, where he was a backup point guard for sure, was setting up his teammates very well, hit half his shots, got to the line for 6 free throw attempts, which led the team, or tied for the team lead with 2 other guys. 14 points, right? In a game that the Pacers lose by 32 and give up 158, he was only a -7. Goga was only a -6, right? Those two guys, Goga shot 8 for 12 on his way to 17 points. Those two, Lance and Goga, were effective enough that they weren't embarrassingly bad like most other players were in this game on both ends. They both found ways to carve out their own contributions. Goga's was getting offensive rebounds and putting shots back up and having at least a decent defensive performance, although at times Mason Plumlee bullied him. And on Lance's side, it was being a solid backup point guard that can kind of control the second unit with creation and some decent scoring, right? 14 points is nothing to scoff at for a guy who only plays about half the game. So Lance has earned the backup point guard role with McConnell out. Even when Brogdon comes back, I think he's ahead of Kiefer Sykes in rotation for sure at this point. So how they decide to keep him going forward contractually, I have no idea. But Lance has earned the backup point guard role, and games like this kind of display why, right? He actually was decent, to his credit. But a big problem, I was thinking about doing a segment when this game was close, was, Justin Holiday and Jeremy Lamb have quietly been okay-ish recently. This game, no one was good in this game. Their defense was atrocious. Lamb's defense is always atrocious, but Lamb hit half of his threes again, had 2 steals. Carlisle has credited his passing a little recently to like lobs, Isaiah Jackson. Justin Holiday was 3 for 7 from deep in this game. Those two guys finished with bad games. Both of them did, but for a time in the first half, they were both looking like quality vets, and that's kind of important for the Pacers going forward. The trade deadline coming up, that those guys continue to have at least decent performances or statistically interesting performances that get some eyes on them. But the game kind of turned late in the first half when I put this note in: foul trouble for bigs. And then the second half comes along, and the Pacers are going with O'Shea Brissett at center again. They have to because of foul trouble and because they have so many guys out. And then the game just totally turns on its head. Goga finishes with 3 fouls in less than 20 minutes. This has been a problem for him his whole career and continues to absolutely be a big problem for him in a game like this where, again, he can't even stay on the court for 20 minutes without fouling like crazy. His foul rate is just unbelievable. Per 36 minutes, he's 5.5 fouls per 36 minutes this season. 6 last year, right? Like, that's a lot. He's got to be better about that. And Isaiah Jackson, as a rookie, is in a similar boat. But as you progress as a big and learn the reads and rotations and pattern recognition, you're supposed to get better at not fouling. Like, it's more expected that Isaiah would be a foul-prone rookie who's learning the speed of the game than Goga. Goga's got to get better at that. Isaiah as well, though, 8 fouls entering this before this game started, with 8 fouls per 36 minutes, and Isaiah finished with 5 in 24 minutes in this game, right? Those two guys' foul trouble was obviously killer because it puts the Hornets on the free throw line. Mason Plumlee was just tearing up the Pacers at a point in the third quarter where he got to the line 2 possessions in a row, and then he finished with 6 assists because all of a sudden they were trying to send a little more at him because they were small. Like, that can't happen, and there's a consequence of having Sabonis and Turner out. We'll talk about Turner in the last segment. Sabonis could return this weekend, Carlisle said. He's progressing. He did some on-court work before the game again, and he's close-ish to a return. I think he'll be back before the trade deadline and maybe even before February, which is good for the Pacers, but they just have no bigs, and that was really killer for them. And then in the third, once Mason Plumlee got going and the Pacers, they went to a switchier lineup, but it didn't work, and LaMelo Ball took over in the third. Lance and Goga were the only decent players for the Pacers in the third, and then it just completely snowballed from there. So it just became atrocious very quickly. None of the starters were good in the third. They all got benched late in the third, and they were done for the night. None of them played more than 26 minutes that Torrey Craig played. Torrey Craig played okay. He had 14 points and shot over 50% podium game for him, which in this game is extremely low bar to clear. But yeah, none of the Pacers rotation guys were good. Kiefer Sykes Dwayne Washington ended up getting benched for Kiefer Sykes. It was one of those games. It was awful for the Pacers. It got to the point of being so bad that the lone potential bright spot story from this game, beyond a decent young guy first half and young guy game in general, Terry Taylor, two-way forward Terry Taylor, who's been just absolutely balling for the Mad Ants this year, plays almost 10 minutes, almost the full fourth quarter. He hasn't played hardly at all this season for the Pacers, just 6 minutes, of playing time prior to this game. He scored his first NBA points, 5 rebounds. He was one away from being a team leader in rebounds in 9 minutes. That's what he does. He's a G League leader in rebounds. Had 4 points as well. Didn't miss a shot. Didn't miss a free throw. Nothing too impressive. 2 assists, but debut that was nice. He could play kind of a guardy wing guy despite being a great rebounder. Yeah, it was an impressive debut for him, and I don't get to talk about him very much. I'm going to sneak that into this game analysis, but really everybody sucked. Like, you can look through the box score and say this guy did this or this play happened. I think the most emblematic play of the game was late in the third quarter. Pacers were getting smoked, obviously. Well, it wasn't so bad late in the third. In fact, they kind of chipped at it and got it to like 14, 13-ish late third. They were kind of coming back from, at one point, it was over 20 in the third quarter. And they had a fast break opportunity to cut it to 10, and they tried to throw the ball ahead to Jeremy Lamb, and it hit Jeremy Lamb in the back of the head and bounced right to Kelly Oubre, who hit a 3. And it went right back to 16, and it never got closer than that again. So just the perfectly emblematic play to describe this game and everything that went wrong for the Pacers. Nobody was good for the whole game. Nobody was consistently impressive for this team. They've got to be better. They've got to be better defensively. It remains completely baffling that they're a bad defensive team. I mean, it's not surprising that they aren't an awesome defensive team. They clearly took a step back after trading Vic and getting rid of Nate McMillan. Sure, I'm receptive to that. But even last year, in a miserable season in which a coach got fired because the season went so poorly, they finished 14th in defensive rating, right? Nate Bjorkgren's team with aggressive and weird defensive schemes was 14th in defensive rating. The Pacers, as it stands right now, are 24th in the NBA in defensive rating. And that is after this game against the Hornets. Just a miserable defensive team. They've got to be better on that end if they ever want to be a serious team, and they kind of don't this year. They're really bad. So let's finish by talking about their best defensive player, because he hasn't played in a while, and the Pacers defense has looked putrid in that stretch. That is not necessarily a correlation causation thing. Let me say that for the 100th time before people just say, oh, it's always people flying out of the woodworks talking about Myles Turner once the Pacers defense plays bad. This is just a convenient time to reflect on those stats once again. So perhaps I am saying a little bit of correlation is implied, of course, but not to the full extent of he would have solved their problems. Whatever. Let's take a little break and talk about Myles Turner's defensive impact. You know the deal. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every day. And if you've listened over 20 minutes in after the Pacers gave up 158, I very, very much appreciate it. You guys are the best. And the reason I love doing this every single day. No Myles Turner for now 7 games for the Pacers this season. They've been without him in full, right? He's missed time. He doesn't play the full game when he plays, so his on-off numbers are not going to be perfectly in line with this. But there's been 7 games this season where Myles Turner has just completely not played. The Pacers' defensive rating in those games is 120.5. 100. Let me say that again. The Pacers' defense in the 7 games that Myles Turner didn't play this season is 120.5. The worst defense in the NBA is the Houston Rockets with a defensive rating of 114.8. They are 5 points per 100 possessions worse than that. Now, let me do something. The Hornets game is included in that. That's the worst Pacers defensive performance in history. Obviously, it's going to have a massive influence on those numbers. Sure, I'll take it out. I'll take it out for you guys. I don't want to be totally biased. In the 6 games before the Hornets game that Turner did not play this season, the Pacers defensive rating is 115.4. That is still below the worst mark in the league. Okay? They are an awful defensive team when Myles Turner is not in the game. And that is not some new surprising thing. I'm not trying to blow your mind or say that Myles Turner is awesome or anything. In fact, if anything, what I would use to add to the current relevant Pacers discourse is this should be a big selling point for his trade value. Look how good the Pacers can be on defense when this guy's out there, and they turn into a high school team when he doesn't play, right? That is maybe the thesis here for them in trade sales. Like, look what just happened to us without this guy on the court, right? We need him to be relevant on defense. That can be your team if you're willing to pony up the assets to get Myles Turner. Anyway, those 7 games have been completely miserable. The Pacers' defensive rating all season with him off is still over 111, which would be roughly 23rd, 24th-ish. These are estimated NBA.com numbers where their new count. They actually count for team advanced stats now, but they're on-off stuff. It's really hard to get specific possession counts, whatever. It's bad. Their defensive rating gets 2 points per 100 possessions or worse, at least when he's out. The Pacers' net rating swing, so basically that, I'll just say this. They're on court with Turner on, their net rating this season is minus 0.3. Basically an even 500 team. That would be a play-in/playoff team in the East right now if you could play all 48 minutes. With him off, they're minus 3.3 points per 100 possessions. They're 3 points per 100 possessions better with Turner on than off. Let's talk about how big of a gap 3 points per 100 possession is. The Boston Celtics have the 8th best net rating in the NBA at 3.1. The Atlanta Hawks and San Antonio Spurs are 17th and 18th, 3 points behind them. The difference between the 8th best net rating team in them. The Grizzlies, top 4 team in the East, are at 3.1. The Spurs and the Hawks are about 3 points behind that, right? 3 points is a huge gap. 3 points is the gap between the Suns, who are one of the best teams in the league, and the Heat, right? 3 points is huge. That is the difference of gap that Myles Turner has provided the Pacers this year. Opponents shoot worse everywhere when he's in the game. Their percentage just drops, right? It's just kind of immaculate how much better Turner makes the Pacers. And it's kind of crazy that I have to make these points these seasons because I think people know he's good, but it seems like his impact gets forgotten until he doesn't play. And he was bad this month. There is Myles Turner did not play well when he was playing this month. And yet still the numbers bear out to say that Myles Turner makes the Pacers a much better basketball team. And then you have games like this where it becomes so painfully obvious that they're missing something under the basket. And this Hornets game, Turner plays, they probably give up 145, 140, right? Like it still would have been a complete mess. They didn't score that much around the rim, right? The Pacers actually scored more points in the paint than the Hornets in this game, right? They still were able to drive and kick or make easy decisions on their pick and rolls and drives because there wasn't a deterrent like Turner on the court. And I still think the Pacers should trade Turner. In fact, I think it would be smart for them to do so. And in fact, even if they had Sabonis in this game, their defense would have been better. One, because they would have scored more points, and then they're playing half-court defense instead of transition defense against the best transition team or one of them in the NBA in Charlotte, but also because he's actually decent at defending centers. He's not a good pick-and-roll defender necessarily or when he's spaced out, but specifically containing Plumlee and banging bodies with bigs, right? Plumlee was plus 26. That was the third best number on the Hornets in this game. He had a fantastic game. He put his stamp all over the game, right? Sabonis would have obviously helped their defense as well in this game. But Turner was sorely missed, and he has been every single time he doesn't play. And even their offense gets a little worse when he's not out there. You know, his floor spacing powers certainly do stretch out other bigs, even though he's not that great of a shooter. He is for a center, right? He certainly has value in this game, kind of displayed what they miss when he's not out there. And going through the numbers only kind of sells it, certainly for some people, and you can watch him and say, I just saw him have 6 points and play 30 minutes. Like, how is he helping that much? Well, it's the little things. It's the intangibles that deter other teams and slow them down and make them think for an extra second instead of just being able to do whatever they want and play free, right? Let's tie it all back to what Goga said at the beginning. He said in his post-game presser, when the other team is confident early in the game, when they really get their feet under them and they can play, they play more free, they make better decisions, they are more confident and shoot better during a game. And I agree with that. Players have said that for years and years and years. And I think there's some statistics that back up. If you make your first shot, your percentage for the rest of games, it's not like a huge difference, but it's a little bit higher over the rest of games. I did that study on Lance a few years ago myself, right? And Turner helps set the tone early in games and things like that. He makes it harder for guys to make those quick decisions throughout the course of a whole game. He's just a boon for the team. And this game kind of showed sometimes what they miss without him. They still would have gotten smoked in this game and given up maybe the fifth, or they've given up 156 times. 150. This was 158, but they would have probably been close to the seventh time ever if he played. But it definitely would have been less points, and this game would not have been what it was, record-setting, if Turner had played. And their defensive rating on the road trip they just played, they gave up 590 points on 500 possessions. That is awful, right? That is awful. And again, Sabonis did not play for a lot of that trip. But that's a 118 defensive rating on the road trip without Turner. It's just becoming more and more clear what his value is the more he doesn't play. And obviously there's more to it than just this guy's out, right? Goga's playing now, and he has some defensive lapses every so often. We just talked about his fouls. We talked about Isaiah Jackson's, right? There are all those issues still at play, but they also highlight those issues are not at play when Turner plays. So this is not a pro keeping Turner thing. This is not he would solve all the defensive issues thing. Their defense was still bottom half of the league, bottom 10 when he was playing, but it does kind of underscore how much worse they can be and are at times when Myles Turner is not in the game for the Indiana Pacers. And this might be a reality they have to face for the rest of the season if they decide to move on from him, which again, I think is 100% the right move, despite everything I just told you. Thank you all for listening today. Yell at me if I just said something dumb at TEastNBA. If you're on YouTube, it's right. I did it wrong again. It's right there. If you're not, it's at TEastNBA. This podcast is at Locked On Pacers. Tomorrow, Rylan Stiles from Locked On Thunder is going to join us to preview Pacers Thunder on Friday. And that game might not be super interesting because those two teams are tank-tastic, but the Thunder went through a retool and then another retool and now a rebuild. There's some blueprints to follow for the Pacers, and I think that is a more important sort of discussion to have with Rylan about team building. So that'll be fun. Stick around for that. Hope everybody has a great day despite the Pacers' historic loss, and we will see you tomorrow.